Hi, I'm Matt Romoser with the Iowa Pork Industry Center, and today I want to talk about gilt development principles, specifically around breeding eligibility. Identifying and managing select gilts properly is a driving factor in a farm's overall profitability. Challenges come with increased input costs, increases and heightens the importance of gilt selection for the farms and overall retention and keeping those gilts on to parity 3. One of the criteria we'd consider when it comes to gilt eligibility is what's their age at puberty or age at first estrus. We know from much of the previous literature that age at puberty is a predictive metric that's associated with longevity and future sow reproductive performance. We also recognize that gilts younger at puberty tend to be culled at higher parities and remain in the herd longer. So overall, a farm should target to have the majority of the gilts exhibit at least one standing heat by 190 to 200 days of age. Challenge of this obviously becomes this requires extensive boar exposure protocols and can be labor intensive for farm employees. Another criteria we'd consider when it comes to gilt eligibility is each gilt should have at least one documented heat no service or HNS. Breeding at the second estrus for gilts positively affects litter size and is a common industry practice. Breeding beyond the second estrus, of course, really only offers minimal improvement in litter size and thus should only be done if gilts are less than optimal weight. So if they haven't met a minimum threshold from a body weight perspective, giving them an opportunity to maybe that third estrus waiting to breed. But otherwise, there's really minimal improvement waiting beyond the second estrus. When we talk about weight at first breeding, farms should target weight at first around 300 and 355 pounds or 135 to 160 kilos. This is done for a couple reasons. Obviously, gilts bred below 300 pounds may not have sufficient energy stores in order to optimize lactation, litter size, or to have the energy reserves to optimize the subsequent breeding. Conversely to that, gilts bred above 350 pounds may experience a lower farrowing rate and be removed from the herd earlier due to structural conformation concerns or having to bear extra weight throughout the course of their lifetime. And we know that gilts that are heavier at first service are likely to have increased lifetime maintenance costs as the overall size and increased calories needed for maintenance tends to be higher with gilts that are heavier at first service. Other consideration we would account for would be acclimating gilts to the housing prior to first breeding. Changes in feed intake unfortunately can sometimes put gilts into a catabolic state or can negatively impact their metabolism and ultimately can reduce ovulation rate. We talk about age of first breeding. A lot of times I hear from producers, that my gilts have best P1 performance or parity 1 performance when we breed them at 35 or 36 weeks of age. Challenge becomes with that is obviously age of first breeding is an important metric to measure, but limitations that come with age of first breeding is obviously we miss out on the selection pressure and the ability to identify gilts with, maybe with suboptimal reproductive development. Typically, if we're breeding gilts past 32 weeks, they can tend to be overweight. And even though we may have increased litter size, but waiting a few more weeks to breed them for the first time, the bump in litter size may not offset the extra non-productive days that those sows or those gilts have accrued in that time. So to summarize, some general gilt eligibility standards. Again, we want to have those gilts or as many of those gilts have reached puberty prior to 200 days of age. We want to wait till those gilts have met a minimum body weight of 300 pounds, but try to breed them prior to exceeding 350 pounds. We want to try to get those gilts to bred on their second estrus, only on the third estrus if a minimum body weight is not met yet. And then finally, we want to be able to acclimate those gilts to their different environment, whether that be a different feeding system or different housing environment for those animals. With Iowa State University, I'm Matt Romoser.